Hey, my name is Deonte Staats, and I'm kicking it with the Entourage.
Hey everybody, y'all are listening to another episode of the Entourage podcast, and you're kicking it with Randy Bonds, just one of the hosts of the Entourage podcast. Shout out to Vanessa and Javi, always holding it down. Thank you so much to our guest today. I am super excited to introduce him. He is a writer on one of my shows that I love, The Chi, amongst many other things. And I was telling him before we even got started, so much of the show was filmed in my old neighborhood where I grew up in. So it was so refreshing to see it. And so I'm super excited to welcome him and celebrate all that he does. He's a writer, producer, just all around storyteller. His name is Deonte Staats, and he is from Philly. I'm super excited to have him come on and share with you a little bit more about who he is, what he does, why he does what he does, and hopefully that you all can take something from it. How you doing today, sir?
I appreciate y'all having me at the Entourage, Randy. We've been trying to do this for a while. Glad we can do this. You know, I feel like with the pandemic, there's even more ways for people to connect, via Zoom, and this, platform has given so many that opportunity. I've seen some of my own people who have helped me along the way. So I'll tell you a little about that later. But it's been great just, to see the behind the scenes, and give that kind of peek for people. And I feel like more and more, that's what people want to see, things that they don't know the story of. They're so invested in the product, it's like, well, let's give them a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So when does your writing career begin? Like, when did you realize that you wanted to write for a living, or even that you could?
Okay, well, yeah. So grew up in Philly and Baltimore were my hometowns. I grew up during that whole neo soul movement. Poetry was my first form of really examining what my thoughts were and what I could put down on page. A lot of it was really heady and, real crunchy. And I felt like, in college, that's where I could see myself. That's where my peak was. Being on stage was not for me. I did the whole travel thing, and putting something on in a book form wasn't really, my goal. Def Poetry Jam was huge and had just gone off the air. And a few years after I moved to Jersey, I completed my goal of performing at the New Eurekan Cafe, which is like, if you're not familiar with, it was what Def Poetry Jam spun off of, this spot in New York where poets really got a chance to not only slam, which is what I think it ended up becoming later, but more about expressing who they were through their words. But I didn't pick up script writing until my late 20s, early 30s, so maybe about 10 years ago, and came to it, in the funniest of ways of going to a Barnes and Nobles and picking up a script writing for dummies book. I thought that's what I needed to do to at least start learning structure. I minored in English. I had that background where I knew how to tell stories in a certain medium. But script writing, I knew there was a structure. And, I started that journey still back on the East Coast when I was running restaurants for about 10 years.
Wow. So how did you go from doing the restaurants into really, again, pursuing what you want to do as far as storyteller?
Well, it kind of intersected. I knew while in the restaurant business, I became a regional director for the Northeast market. So I had the opportunities of shooting commercials for the restaurant chain that I worked with. I'm not going to give them a plug. But it was great because I was essentially what I know now to be the production coordinator. Like, I was the liaison between what it needs to look like, what we will set the standard for, casting, finding those faces, and like telling a story through that way, even if they're in the background. Like, what do we want the brand to represent? And that kind of allowed me to realize that, okay, I'm somebody who's breaking into this industry non-traditionally. I haven't gone to film school. That wasn't my major. I didn't do broadcast journalism or anything when I was shout out to North Carolina A&T, where I was an engineer. So far out of my wheelhouse from where I'm at now. And at that point, I realized I needed to invest in myself. So I took the money that I had. My company shortly got rid of my department, and I took that severance package and shot a proof of concept for a script, that I worked on, script writing for dummies. And I shot a proof of concept. And for those of you not familiar with it, it's like a sizzle trailer for what my idea is. So if you don't know who I am and you've never heard of me before, which no one had, here's what my tone is. Here's what I think this kind of landscape looks like in a visual tone, and that goes along with my script that's completed. So a lot of people were investing in web series, and I could have definitely did that, but I felt the show that I was working on at the time was too expensive to put my own heart and soul into it, knowing that, you know, people even like Issa Rae have to go back to the drawing board with a production studio, with a network, to reshoot those items, because it just isn't done with the budget that needs it. So that was kind of like my calling card. And I shortly moved out to LA and used that to shake some hands.
I love it. And that obviously worked out well for you. So transitioning from Philly to LA, what was kind of the biggest shocks, I'll say, for you, you know, when it came to transitioning to a whole new culture, a whole new coast?
Well, I'd visited before. I had friends that lived out here, and I was living in the New York, New Jersey market. So most of my peers at the time were Broadway people. And, you know, they knew me as a spoken word artist from years ago. And they're like, why aren't you creating anymore? Yeah. And that was kind of like my push out of my comfort zone, because I knew that at the very least, I knew people that were visiting or having sublets or extended stays in LA at this time. Depends on what artistry they were in. And so I'm like, well, let's give it a chance, and let's invest in myself again and take that leap of faith. So I packed up my car and moved across country. But I had people that were already on Broadway, like breaking barriers, that were my, you know, influence, as well as my friends. So I tell them often that, you know, I'm fans of them as well as, you know, a friend. And that kind of allowed me, I think, to come out here. I'm like, I'm a fan of television. Like, before I decided to invest in this career in a script fashion, I watched TV. I'm a fan of stories. You know, I come from a sci-fi background initially, where those are the books I love, because you get lost in those worlds. And then somewhere in the future, it felt like we were marginalized. And I say we unilaterally, but I mean we as like a people of color. I identify as queer as well. So, you know, I realized that, in the future, we're on the aliens, and, you know, these aren't the troubles of our world. Somewhere in the future, we decide that, you know, we get past our own qualms and differences to realize, probably when, you know, the aliens come and we realize it's us versus them. But I want to be involved in those stories. And I think we're just getting started to do those. And I think coming out to LA when I did was just the influx of, you know, the Hollywood Renaissance is what some call it, you know, of this opportunity with this support that didn't exist before in ways that we hadn't seen since the 90s.
Yeah, I love it. And, you know, coming out here, it's a different industry. Broadway and theatrical is one thing, but out here it's different because, yes, commercial here is different. You know, commercial TV and film, it looks different, it sounds different, it's a different beast, you know. So how did you go from spoken word, which tends to have a different tone, right, and transition your writing to something that was a little more commercialized, or, you know, a little more structured, and maybe a little more I'll say, well, I want to say well-rounded, but a little more diverse, because again, when you're doing spoken word, a lot of times it's personal, you know, and it's a little more of a free expression. Whereas with TV and film, there are so many other people who have to put their stamp on it, and people oftentimes who aren't even qualified to do what you do, but because of certain politics, or just because of, you know, their position, they have a say that you, even as a creative or the creator, don't sometimes. So how did you go from doing an art form that was very free to like having one where it's a little more collaborative, and you have to, you know, get a little more approvals before you can just do it your way?
That's the word, collaboration. I know that in television, or even with restaurants, you know, the collaboration. Like no one, I'm not cooking the meal, serving the meal, eating the meal. It's even the people that are eating it that are invested in this transaction. And with television, it's the same thing. I'm not making something just for me. I'm making it for an audience. And even though this main character or these couple of people are really, what I really want them to be, once I break this into a room, they're going to grow into people I never even thought. When costuming and dressing gets to them, they're going to change their whole look, and they're already better dressed than I thought they were, because in my imagination, there exist worlds and galaxies, but the collaboration is when these people become favorites and fleshed out. You hear that term where it's like these characters aren't real. It's because you don't know them. And I had the benefit, I think, of working all across the country with so many different people. That dialogue and tone was something that I didn't struggle with. It was more of the structure. And I think I benefited from, and even with the people that were on Broadway, I took a course from, shout out to Lee Edward Colston. He's a graduate of Juilliard, who was in the MFA program, who was a teacher come to this space and told me that once I got out to LA, I invest in taking more LA courses, because they're going to teach you something that's prevalent and of the moment. And then 2 years later, the pandemic happened. And then all of a sudden, as a writing assistant at the time when I was on the Shy, I realized that the Zoom world and the way of taking notes and that had just changed. And I was on the bubble of that, so I realized that in collaboration, it became even harder because people in the Zoom room had never even met each other. And so that kind of interconnectivity that you exist, that synergy from a room of writers, not talking over each other really, but not in a rude way, becomes different on Zoom. So, you have to be more poetic about how you paint a story. So I think for me, it's about conviction, and as a poet, you're selling someone an idea, even if it's your emotion. It's like, remember when you felt that way? I think that's why shows like This Is Us resonate with us, because it talks about loss of a parent. And wherever you're at in your trajectory of life, some people, everyone identifies that with that differently. And I think what's brilliant about that show is that it doesn't allow everyone to have the same feeling about their parents. And that's real. And I think that's just what poets do, even when you saw them showcased on television, is that we had to connect with people by telling them the story that they know. It just sounds a little bit different. It's a different city. It's a different person's name, but I know that relationship. I know that experience. And I want to see more of that.
How do you find that balance of putting your heart and your soul into each character, right? But like balance? Literally, yes. Finding that balance of putting your heart and soul, but also thinking about the recipient and what they need, finding a way to, because we talked about this on the upcoming episode, actually, with the host. For me, I think about artists selling merch. And a lot of times the artist selling merch is just selling something personal, their name, their picture, their face. And it's just like, okay, how do you make that reoccurring? Because honestly, if I'm a fan or a friend, I'm buying that just to support you. I'm not buying it because I need it. So I think as artists, it's hard to try that line sometimes of knowing what's necessary and what just feels good, for me versus what feels good for the audience versus what feels good for all of us, or what may be painful to me but resonate with an audience and therefore bring healing to them, though it hurts me to open up that wound. It may be a necessary sacrifice, So I guess that's why, again, I ask, how do you find that balance of giving your audience, making sure that you're in it and you're giving what you need, but also the audience is receiving what they need at the same time through what you create?
I think, back to the collaboration, like the art. And I think at that time becomes the collaboration between the writer, director, and the actor. Because the director wants, the writer, the words are there, but it's up to the director's job to get that emotion out of the actor. The actor has to interpret what those words mean to them. And, there's a conversation, as a dance that happens in those spaces where some people have to be more vulnerable. They take space in between words. I think that's the best way to describe it, because even like I just did there, even when we know the words, because there's a difference between memorization and like an emotion. And I think that's what it is. It's like, I know this word, but it's so hard for me to say it. Like whatever it is, if it's the accent on it or the middle portion. And I think it's why it's so important when, you know, I watch everything in closed caption. I love to hear what was intended for you to hear, even if it was in the background, because I think it's all to tell a better story. And then that's just the gift of having a room of writers from different aspects to really fill those people up, because the best way that an ensemble gets to shine is when the ensemble of writers are filling them with their own personal stories. And the balance is sometimes it's too much, you know, sometimes it's a little too much like me, and then or too much like the actor. And we often try to hold them to the standard of that character, or, you know, hold them guilty for the choices that the character makes, because we can't separate the two, you know. And I think, you know, we're often now being asked to, you know, do more work in that space of even the method actor, to separate the work from the words, from the 9 to 5 to when you get home. And I think that's the brilliance of having people like intimacy coordinators, from having therapists available when topics are tough. And I think there should be regular practices, whether they are for sex or intimate scenes, or for things that, because we don't know what a person's trigger is, but by offering it, you know, I'm a faithful believer in therapy, because it allows you to stop bullshitting yourself about, you know, the things that I'm as open as I think I may be. You know, I may tell my friends, like my homies, 90% of what's going on in my life. But there's like that 10% that you just feel like, would you judge me if I told you this? And I feel like your therapist's job, like, it's like going to the regular doctor and not telling them that you smoke, or not telling them that you drink alcohol. It's like, who is that hurting? You know? And I think by freeing yourself up from that transparency, I try to live in that transparency. Like, my characters all have secrets. You know, I love that when I talk about the work that I do, is that's the through line between all of them, from the sci-fi to the dramas to the dramedies, is that everyone has secrets. And as a bartender in restaurants, it became so interesting when people would sit there and think, I'm on a conference, I'm here thousands of miles away from people that even know me, and I'm gonna sit up to this bartender and tell them my problems. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I'm gonna buy you this drink because I've never heard this story before. You have no idea that one day you're gonna see it on television.
Yeah, I love that. You know, this is the thing, I think as creatives, everything has the potential to be inspiration. Yeah. The smallest, what somebody else may see as the smallest, most seemingly insignificant moments to somebody else are literally like the sparks that inspire us. And you're like, what? You took that from there? I'm like, yes. Right. You don't know what I'm hearing and here. You don't know what I'm seeing in here, you know? So I love that. I also want to ask you this. What is the relationship between, because I know there's a hierarchy when you're on set, right? You know, where it's like, it's the director's set, you're often told, you know, your job as the writer, a lot of times it's complete by the time we're on set. But is there ever a time when the intention of your words are interpreted differently by the actor? And if so, how do you deal with that, you know, that interpretation? Is it something that you address with the actor or the director, or do you create dialogue to figure out, okay, why are you making this choice, and let's dig into that? You know, like, what does that look like? What does that conversation look like?
Unfortunately, there are rules to this stuff, you know, like in our business, you think that you're right to a degree. Once the writer has gotten approval from the network and studio and we're on set, it becomes the director's job. It's like, oh, I'm sending my child to go spend the weekend with their uncle or their aunt. And it's like, okay, cool. I'm gonna trust that uncle and auntie are taking care of them, you know, the best way possible. They're gonna do and feed them the things that they're gonna do. And in that, I feel, and there's a pre-production stage. If you don't know your director, that's when you're getting to know your director. You're on calls with them about mood, about setting, music, clothing. Like, you're involved in that process. As a writer, hopefully your showrunner allows you to have that experience. I luckily was on The Chi. But even if you aren't, there are tone calls, there are meetings to make sure that your vision at that point is everything is when you're supposed to be communicating with your director of what you want. Now, if there's some discussion that needs to happen where actor thinks it's one thing, the director thinks it's another thing, that's an opportunity. If you are on set, if you have a great relationship with your director, to speak to your director about it. Even if your actor is asking you, talk to your director about it, because that's like, oh, well, dad said do this, but mom says go do that. Like you don't ever want to be in that when you're in a business. And the business of television is that the director has a schedule and they have a team of people that they've communicated things to. And by hopefully helping, if that's where the place it comes from, you may have disrupted something that now has screwed up the tone, that screwed up the wardrobe. If all their theme is going red, red, red for anger, and you told her to play the scene happy now, and it's just like, oh, you screwed up the theme for, this episode thematically, and that's important. You just never know why a director makes those choices, because their choices are very detailed in how visually you perceive it. When me, as a writer, I may be in that space, but ultimately I'm trying to make sure that the words resonate with you. I'm hoping that at the end of my episode, you have a hot line that you really, really love, that you're going to repeat or make a part of your wheelhouse when you, hitting on somebody, or, when you're talking with the homies, or when you go see your parents, are these things that you would not often say, but those things triggered you too in a positive way.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So a lot of times starting off as a storyteller, you're doing the indie films and you're creating your own work and you're doing whatever you can, as Issa Rae said, you're networking across to, bring a vision to life. But again, you cross over into network television and it's a different ballgame because it's a bigger budget, which means you can do more. So there's more room for your creativity to thrive. However, at the same time, again, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot more hands in the pot. So understanding that there are also going to be times when your way and your thoughts, and no matter how much you fight for a character or for, saying like, this isn't realistic, it's going to go. And again, it's out of your control sometimes. But considering the different, how do I say this? Considering the different hats you wear, just in life period, the different titles you may subscribe to, how do you allow those things in your life, your culture, just your life experiences to push you to stand up for diversity, to stand up for inclusion, and to stand up for authenticity when at times stories may be the other creators and other people you're collaborating with may have the best intentions, but because of a lack of awareness or a lack of experience or a lack of knowledge, they could be hidden in a way that could, have backlash that they may not prepare for. Case in point, I was working on a project and the director, who's culturally different from me, thought that, Black folks at a family reunion would be dressed a certain way. When I'm like, oh no, Black folks at a family reunion, we're dressed in shorts and there's a themed t-shirt. Yes, there's no suit and tie, none of that. It's a picnic, and it's again not wrong. It's just culturally it's different, and that's a detail that you wouldn't know. So a lot of times you see more of us brought into the rooms, for the sake of inclusion, but sometimes we don't get to maximize the purpose of us being there because our experience isn't necessarily trusted or tapped in enough. So you being a person who are in these rooms, how do you use your background and your influences and just what's real and authentic and true to you to stand up for the characters you write for, or make sure that the people that you identify with are represented in these rooms and on these shows?
Ooh, you better ask a question. You know the term dying on a hill. It's that when it's used, it means you're pinned to this moment and it will be remembered. Doesn't mean that, the project dies, but, and the way I use it, the reason I preface it that way is that you have to be prepared at some point to be pinned to a moment and be evaluated by it positively or negatively. So you got to make your best argument for it and know that this hill is high and long. And sometimes if you pin yourself to a low moment, you never get to go higher. Mm-mm. And in that, it may be that you have now fought for every single character to be so specific to how you want it to be that there's no room for error for anyone else to come in there and say what's right or wrong. It's no longer collaborative in that space. And I not say that's a compromise, but and I also say that when you get in certain chairs, when you wear certain hats, bigger chairs, as you go up in the hierarchy, you get to pin yourself to more moments. You kind of get more things to throw at the board. And I feel if you're thinking of it that way, it's like a dartboard. If we're pinning someone to a moment and you're trying to hit a bullseye, as an assistant, you probably only have one dart ever for the season. So make it a good one. And it's not to say you only have one pitch, but make sure that one ask. I always tell people that when you're in a position of assistance or you want to go to a next level, know what your ask is. Someone's going to come one day and ask you what you want. Do you know what you want? And do you know when that person's asking why you're asking it? Like, don't ask someone who's, as you mentioned, the ESIF is peer-to-peer, they can't put you on to certain things, But if someone from a certain level comes and like, well, what do you need? Know what that ask is. My ask my first season on The Chi was to go to set. Set experience I thought was invaluable to my experience as a writer, not as just from commercials, but from the standpoint of television. Little did I know the pandemic was going to happen 4 months later. That experience became so invaluable. More I couldn't put a price on what my experience was, because there are writers to this day that have gotten hired during the pandemic that haven't got a chance to go to set because of COVID. I wasn't able to visit set during my episode last season because of protocols. And I appreciated just the experience from the previous season of just being tapped in. So going on to say that I think it's important to know what you're fighting for and why you're fighting for it. And when you're in the room and you realize you are the only one, sometimes you have to pin to yourself that low moment. And that low moment may push you may then realize, because you're pinned at that low moment, that there is no room for you to go up further, that it's time for you to leave that show. I used to tell my parents there may be a time when a hit show, I'm on, and I decide to leave for whatever reason. And there may be something behind the scenes, that I know that they're, bringing in new people or that, the new direction that they're going in isn't something I want to be a part of, or any plethora of reasons why someone leaves a show. But that's just the business that this is. Like, as a writer, creator, and producer, my job as a storyteller is to tell stories that I can sit in the bigger chair to tell. And as I learn more, I'll get more experience and more in my arsenal to do that. I align myself with more people that know my work, and I learn more about the business, because it is a business. And as people apply to these fellowships and these opportunities that exist out here in LA, when I tell you it's about people that know you as well as it is the work that you do. And that part, as we get back to seeing people face to face, is important, because these are people that you'll be working with, especially in television, in a room, Zoom or not, 6 to 10 hours a day, on set, 12 to 16-hour days, trying to get one episode of television done. But I tell people often that this is just TV and film. We are not building rockets here. This is make-believe. So I don't let myself get too stressed out about the make-believe. I just enjoy the fact that we've got a chance to peek behind the curtain and we sit in this, world of magic and and be responsible to that moment. So if it means taking care of our characters, walking out of the door with our idea because they want to change a representation that you feel needs to be seen, tell them why, first, before you become indignant. I have an East Coast kind of presentation at times. So I realize it's called passion when I say it, that it comes off a little angry at times. But I think if my character has to be that, then that's what I'm going to invoke when I get ready. Like this particular character that of this pitch, this is why this needs to happen, because I didn't get to see this. This character isn't even on television now. And when he is, he's sidelined, or she's not given an opportunity to be positive. At any point, it's always negative. And I think about that when I see queer characters, when I see people of color, Black people, men especially, how many men and women of a browner hue that are parents in television and commercial are important to me, because I want to make sure that the little Deontes of the world get a chance to see themselves and think that's okay, you know, because colorism is real, racism is real, homophobia is real, and it's prevalent in television in a way that you can't be authentic to the world that you're in if you refuse to recognize that there are people that do not exist like you. And I think that's the brilliance of like streaming and things of that nature, because we aren't just subjected to what the 5 or the 10 executives that sit in chairs that don't look like me and don't have my experience. You can't tell me what a Black queer boy from the East Coast was or lived through because you haven't been in those spaces.
Yeah. I want to ask you in particular, as you're talking about, you know, queer characters and people of color, a lot of times you've seen them portrayed in specific ways, very stereotypical ways. I was even just talking about with a friend earlier today, like how growing up, you know, we only saw the gay character as flamboyant. So you never got to know a well-rounded gay character, or even, again, to get to know well-rounded Black characters when they were the token Black. It was just like, oh, you're the one we let in the room a lot of times, you know. But nowadays, you are seeing more, like, I think Ian Patrick Polk, you know, was like in his own lane back in the day, and that was like a whole separate thing. It wasn't really commercialized. Yeah, it wasn't commercialized, and something that was just like accessible, you know, on the way it is now, you know. So how do you take the rooms you're in and take your own personal experience and the people that you know from just your own world, from the arts and even Broadway, where again that's a big community of the LGBTQ, you know, is there, and there are a lot of you know, there's a lot of support for that community within those spaces. So how do you take your natural love and affection that you have for that community and being a part of that community and making sure that the fullness of those characters and like all the colors of those characters are represented, and not just in the stereotypical ways that we've been, you know, so used to over the years?
Yeah, I was fortunate to be brought on for a project that's coming out in a few weeks. I don't know when this is airing, but in May, called Carte on the all Black arm of AMC network. Thank you. I was brought on because it was created by a wonderful woman, Black woman that's in PR, and think of it as like the Sex and the City, but of 20-year-olds, late 20s, of Black people in LA. And they have, instead of 4 women, it's 3 women and 1 queer man. And not only that story, but in general, the men in the storyline needed to be fleshed out more. So I was brought in from that perspective. I really wanted to make sure that the character did not become, you know, just an opt-in for one of the girls, you know, and that's fine to be represented. That we have so many shows of, that's false. We don't have so many shows. We have very specific shows that only focus on small portions of queer life, Pose being one of those. It was a very specific portion of queer life that it focused on. And I'm so glad it exists. I think the character felt inauthentic to me and my friends. And not to say that I don't have friends that span the gamut of queer, trans, and all the other spaces that I feel need to be represented on television. But I feel like the safe space for queer television has always existed in authenticity and finding Black men who were and identify as queer, playing queer, is a hard space to be in. Jensen Atwood from Noah's Ark talks about it. He was a straight man and even questioned, you know, his own experience by being on that show and being exposed to as many queer men and that he had before. I think that's important to talk about when we talk about casting, because it doesn't allow for, I'm not saying that they can't, but we need space for trans actors to play trans people on television. Because again, it's about that nuance of adding something that I can't speak to. And in that, or that director can't speak to, or the network doesn't get it because you haven't lived that experience. And I think in our own community, we're just becoming accepting to having these discussions, because it's not being placed in the space of DL culture. I think for a while, that's all we could focus on is like, well, he's cheating and he's this and that. And it's just like, well, what about, Uncle Tommy that we knew, his friend that they lived in the one bedroom that we just don't talk about? Well, what's Uncle Tommy's story? Like, why can't we explore that in television in the way that we have? There are so many representations of shows. And I think even with queer storytelling, I love Lovecraft Country. It was a lot for one thing to be all things, because once we have a show that breaks into a genre that we're not used to, it has to be everything to everybody. And that's so unfair. And I think even in the queer roles that they have to exist to everybody. But I was a teenager, a late teenager, early 20s when The Wire came out. So shout out to Michael K. Because seeing Omar, queer, openly queer man, dark-skinned, handsome, and walking down the street and everyone respected him, whether it was fear of respect or respect for what he did, they respected him. They called him everything outside of his mama's name when his back was turned. But making that part of the normal has something that I've always been interested in, because that was normal to me growing up. My 20s, my 30s were filled with out men that span the gamut of expression and wanting to write stories about them. I got an opportunity to, one of the characters in Carte has a great relationship with their father. It's not put me in a trash can. It's, hey, stop spending money. It's like normal things. Like this is a normal conversation between a father and their 20-something-year-old son. Not, I don't care who you're sleeping with. That's conversation for, when it becomes a conversation. But I don't care who you're sleeping with. Are you making good choices? Are you happy? And I think we don't get a chance to talk about other people's happiness. We're only concerned with ours, or how a character speaks to us, realizing that we're cutting so many people off from what that expression can be. And even this disabled communities, we've seen the impact of Coda winning the Oscar. My mother worked for the Center of Deaf Services in Baltimore, and signed for the last 18 years of her life before she passed. And in that, for me, that expression was something that, even though I didn't know how to use it as much as she did, was a part of my culture growing up. So seeing that movie moves me, because I know for the first time it's the majority of the actors, not the minority, not just the one. And I just want to get into a space when we're the majority storytellers behind the scenes as well as in front, and we're just starting to push that over the top here, I think.
I love that. And I think it's just so important, like you said, just for us to be able to and everybody have a chance to look up and see themselves on camera, on TV, and to see their stories and see something that resonates with them, that they can learn from and be inspired by. What does it mean for you to know that the stories you tell, the people you give voice to, that they are out here literally resonate with people, and it is bringing healing to somebody, it's bringing understanding to somebody. Like it's not just entertaining somebody, but it's giving them that closure that they may have need. Like it's giving them what it is that they need to go on. How does that feel as a creative?
It's a little surreal sometimes, I worked on a movie called The Obituary of Tunde Johnson about a queer 18-year-old who kind of lives through this Groundhog Day of police brutality and ends up losing his life in this crazy loop. And I remember most of the production team, with the exception of one of the EPs, identified as straight. Also, the writer was born and raised in Kenya. So to certain portions of the storyline, I remember the writer Stanley Kalu, shout out to him, and Ali Leroi, who directed it, asking me, D, what's something a Black father would say to his son before giving him his car? I was like, oh, how long we got? Because, my dad had many a lecture from me, whether it was my own car, whether it was a car I was borrowing, but more about staying safe. And also, you know, whether my dad knew at 18 that I was queer, I didn't come out until I was 22, a few years later. I often think he's also a Cancer. A few days before me, and I think he always knew me better than I thought. I think both of my parents did. So whatever secrets, things I was going through, because I wasn't even, I didn't really have an experience like with a guy till after high school. So it wasn't even like guilt at that point. It was just like, I remember the line being, whatever you do, you stay safe, you make it back home. And it made the trailer, and it like, even saying it now, it's just like I can hear him in my ears talking about it, because it was a real line that I realized so many Black men tell their children, or want to tell their children, and should tell their children, because, and I think it's something that I did an experiment, you know, because I worked in a restaurant industry that was predominantly white. Majority of people of color, Black people specifically, say be safe, stay safe as a salutation. They don't just say goodbye. You know, a lot of white people don't say that. And I work with a majority of white people in the restaurant industry, and I realized that that's a given, that just leaving, they'll be safe. Like, text me when you get home means different things to my family, because it's like, you're driving as a Black man, miles. That's an unsafe act these days. So hearing that was just like, that specific line, I know you asked about in general, but that one resonated with me, because when it's in the trailer, I'm like, oh, this is a point that the story turns, as well as in our lives as Black men, when that elder tells you something that's more than just what they're telling you right now, that you think back on, and it's like, oh, this is a message passed down from generations. And it's being folded in a way that you can receive it here. That's what I want with my stories to do, whether it's in the small or the big, whether you identify with the main characters or just someone in the background. I want you to invest, or at least find yourself, or search out healing in the work that some of these characters get to do, even if it's fictionalized. Because I think as a writer, you know, that's like the greatest therapy, you know?
Let me ask you this. Obviously, we've all been going through the pandemic, and being Black during the pandemic was a different experience from our counterparts, you know, who sometimes didn't understand just like the fact that our lives felt on the line, like every day. Like, I know for me, seeing a Black man from CNN get cuffed, I was like, oh, a Black man from CNN, one of the top news stations, don't stand a chance. And what chance do I have? You know, just the average, everyday Black man. And not that it should be different, because honestly, it's not different, because that showed us that he too is the everyday Black man. And no matter what, like, we're constantly being reminded that we are all kind of equal in their eyes, in a way that, you know, they perceive or see us, which equally we can't necessarily help. Yes, completely. So for you as a Black man having to live through that time, how did that impact your art and the stories that you desire to tell or have told since?
You know, I moved to LA during the year of the Baltimore uprising, Freddie Gray. And I made it a point to, and then I moved here, drove across country 2 weeks after Sandra Bland was killed in Texas. So a trip of documenting and tagging where I'm gonna be at turned into a little bit of, it was a little solemn. You know, I was worried about my own safety, worried about the safety of the people that were traveling with me. And I think when the pandemic started, I thought about my safety in the same way again. Am I safe home? Am I safe doing the things that I'm doing? Am I safe even telling the stories that I'm telling? And will storytelling change? Will I have to change? Well, just getting to this point of getting writing credits? Will all of it go away? You know, will we go back to the forms of just writing? Will we lose this medium until we're able to see each other again face to face safely? And you know, we made precautions to do that. I think my work has not necessarily been influenced by it, in the sense that my work has always been about it. It's always been about not feeling safe in one's own skin. The pilot that I did the proof of concept for, my sample, is called Send and Receive. It's about a Black queer person in politics as the press secretary. And it's that's such a tough space to be in, whether you're queer or not. I mean, you see these white women, these white men getting harangued daily by the press corps. And if you had a secret that no one else knew, or if they knew it and knew it, you know, if they didn't know the details, like I used to work I did my community service for Elijah Cummings in Baltimore. His office was right down the street from my high school, and, you know, filing paperwork, that kind of thing, handshake. I didn't even act like, you know, we were tight, but I realized early enough, I'm like, oh, I don't want this, because I was hiding secrets at 16, 17, like, and then I really got to college and I was like, oh, there was many things that needed to be kept secret that I was up to, that I would feel would come out the woodwork had I pursued politics, and, you know, telling a story of what that looks like now. Like, people aren't able to date based on, you know, their politics in the DC area. It's similar to the media or movie and television film industry in LA. A lot of people in the DC area work in politics, and when you're talking about relationships, it becomes complicated and a little dramatic. And I thought, you know, a version of in a different timeline, in a multiverse, there's a Deonte that did go on to do and pursue those type of things. And when did he get caught up? So, you know, I think it's just been one of those things where, you know, I see where we're at now, where I love the idea of satire and allegory versus the comedy that we see nowadays, because I feel like some of it's either too on the nose or it's hurtful, as we're beginning to see. And I think reality TV has helped blur those lines, because we don't separate the real person from some of the scripted versions of things they're given to do, or scenarios they're supposed to be in. Because let's face it, whether it's unscripted or not, there's a scenario that's being painted. Spoiler, sorry. But if we just made a version of those characters, instead of Nene Leakes, if we had CC Peaks, you know, I could get behind that, you know, because then I'm not tearing down somebody. So I feel like nowadays it's important to tell stories, even if you have to apply a little bit of fiction to it, you know, utilize what your art is and the craft is, you know, to create something, unless it's a biopic piece, or unless it's supposed to be specifically about somebody. Why not add a little flair so that you can take some dramatic license with it and you're not hurting people. And people the next day aren't talking about real people. They're talking about fictional characters, and that kind of work allows us to have empathy for people. But when you feel like a real person has no room for change, you know, not only are you kind of talking a lot about yourself, or your spaces or relationships that you're in, you just don't allow room for conversation. And I think when I go back to it, I want, like my poems, people to talk about it at the end. Like, what did that make you feel? Why did you feel that way? Is it something we need to talk about? Like, you know, I would hope to never be in a relationship like that. You know, I hope that it breaks open something for people to continue the conversation.
Yeah. You know, you have been able to be a part of some great productions already, and still have more to come. But what stories have you yet to tell that you're looking forward to telling?
Well, you know, I mean, the dream, I think if I had to pinpoint a moment when I knew I wanted to work in television, it had to be Star Trek. Like, my mom got me into Star Trek, The Next Generation. And for me, it was like, oh, this is it. I mean, you know, LeVar Burton, seeing him in this role, I want to work on Star Trek. I want to work on Doctor Who, be one of the first Black showrunners of something that you just aren't expecting. Because if we only allow the people that previously held those spots, we're only going to continue to tell the same stories. Hence the influx of reboots. Why can't we reboot things and rather just be, let's make it a guy or a girl this time, or let's just make them a Black family, why not make it a different decade? Why not make it a different thing altogether? Like, let's tell a different version of the story. And across town, this family was experiencing that, because I think there are spaces for us to do more. Right now, we need to do more. Like, I don't want to compare Lovecraft Country to them because they're two different kind of genre shows. And I want there to be 10 more Lovecrafts and thems before we're in that conversation. I want there to be a Star Trek and a Star Wars and Orville and all the other things that exist, because only then can you really compare it to something. Because right now we're only comparing it to its white predecessors, or, I don't know these characters. And like, well, of course you don't, because we've never had a chance to explore it over the last, 60, 70 years of like cinema. And now that we're in this space, let's tell it and let us tell it, and look like us. I think my favorite episode of Star Trek, the new iteration, was Sonequa Martin Green as the lead. The season 3 premiere had no white characters. Like, we're in space. It was her, another Black man, or another person of color from a different planet, and everyone else was the people of color, green, blues, reds, but not a single. I'm like, oh shit, this actually exists, because we've now imagined it. Like, you're not even the global majority. So let's start telling stories that look like the global majority. I'm all for the influence of the Nollywoods and the Bollywoods, and let's expand those, because I'm a big closed caption fan. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was like the first time I went to a movie and watched subtitles all the way through. Shout outs to Michelle Yeoh, because Everything Everywhere All at Once was like one of my absolute favorite movies recently, because we get to see someone who's only known for either her fighting or for her passion, but to combine that with also a dope story and comedy, I think those are when we get to see people in their full humanity, like the Minari's or Parasites, and Codas, and movies of that expansion, and the Moonlights, until it becomes regular conversation. I don't want to compare any of them, because they exist for these Korean, deaf, non-hearing, intersectional communities, and it just needs to be more of that intersection. And I'm gonna stand in that intersection until we have some more things passing through.
I love that. Who do you do this for? Beyond yourself, who's been your motivation to keep going when you've wanted to give up, when you're like, well, it's not happening for me the way I thought it would, or as fast as I thought it would, etc. Who has been the person, or whether that's present or past, who has pushed you to believe in yourself and to keep pushing towards the place that you knew you ultimately wanted to be?
My parents, of course. My mom and dad supported me through everything, coming out, through high school, all the things I was a part of. They always knew that I was going to do whatever I wanted to do, trouble or not. And I lost my mom last year and gave a portion of her eulogy. And, my mom said that I could be whatever I wanted to be. So I decided to be free. I decided that if the two people that brought me in this world love me unconditionally, damn everybody else, and that just allows me to create from a place of transparency, to fly with a wind that's unseen, to take every step that feels dangerous, and not because of like support financially, but I've talked to so many people that don't have that level of investment, and even if it's just a word of I'm proud of you. My mom had a quick and unsuccessful battle with cancer. She saw my episode of The Chi and passed 2 weeks after. I know that's a testament to her knowing that whatever I'm supposed to do, I'm going to be successful at it. And then she saw the beginning of it. And not only the beginning, I think she just saw the next milestone crossed off the list of many that she's seen me accomplish. And, know that that support does not come with the vetting, of as you're sure would walk me through it. And that kind of planning and talking about it with people that care about you, whether it's your parents, your family, your chosen family, people that stand to gain nothing from you winning other than getting to cheer you on. Those are the people you should listen to more as you go up. I have, as I mentioned before, been blessed to have friends in this industry, two of which I know I wouldn't have been I would have gotten to this writing form. I know that it would have taken me a little bit longer without the push of my writing coach, who I mentioned earlier, and then Brian Terrell Clark.
Oh, yeah, it's one of my homies. He was on the guest of ours.
We've known each other, since we are early 20s in college. Yeah. And I know that his opportunity to work on Broadway was based on faith and unseen things. I feel the same way. When I moved out here, I had an opportunity to connect with him while he was working on a project here. And before he disappeared, I'm like, this is where I'm going to be, And then to be full circle, we live a few miles down from each other for the last few years. I'm probably closer than we've lived since the New York, New Jersey times. Yeah. And in that, I realized, as I said before, someone who I'm a fan of, who I'm amazing friends, like family even, I get to not only lean on, but trust their experience when they're reading my work, when they're recommending me to somebody else. Because again, they stand to gain nothing from it other than wanting to see the same thing my mom saw, to me to be happy, to be successful in the medium that I've chosen, and want nothing other than that. And I think we grow together in those spaces because as a writer, as actors, as directors, producers, it'd be great to turn around and see all of my boys, all of my sisters, all of my nieces and nephews, all of my cousins working on the project. And whether they be blood family or family that I've worked with and had an opportunity to see do their own thing, I want those opportunities to exist for us in those ways that I don't know them all. I can pinpoint the deals that I know out there because they're still far and few for us. So I want to know, oh, well, no, I didn't hear about that. I would love to hear that. I would love to say that 3 times a day about somebody getting an opportunity. No, I didn't hear about that because it's happening so often for us.
I love that. Thank you so much for giving us your time, for sharing your story. Yes, and we're looking forward to just continuing to see the stories that you will tell. I hope the people who haven't gotten a chance to know your work yet will take the time to dig into your work now afterwards. Any ways people can reach you and stay in contact with you, this is your moment to let them know.
Sure. So my Instagram is the thing I use the most. I know it's weird. Check my stats. Stats is STAATS, all one word. And I taught a writer's workshop, as I mentioned before, called Always Write. It's about breaking into the industry. And I'll probably be offering some consulting through there, but Always Write TV on Instagram are the best ways to hit me up. My email is all linked through there as well.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Awesome. Y'all heard it right here. If y'all want to get in touch with him and learn more about him, that is the best way to do so. Make sure y'all check him out on Instagram and check my stats with 2 A's. Yes. And Always Write.
Yes. Always Write TV.
Always Right TV. Thank you so much once again. We're appreciative. We're looking forward to again supporting you. Come back and talk to us again for the next project and the one after that. And yeah, bring more of your friends with you as well. And thank you for supporting. I know again, I've seen you watch our lives during the pandemic, and I've seen you tune in to support your friends and stuff. So we genuinely appreciate you supporting us as well. And again, we're excited for people to be inspired by your story.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. As always, you can like, share, comment, subscribe, rate, do all of those things. We would love to hear from you and to hear your feedback. Go ahead and join us on Instagram at The Entourage Podcast, as well as like our Facebook page, The Entourage Podcast. Also, visit our website, theentouragepodcast.com. Sign up to get our emails, and we will see you all next time under the spotlight.